The emergency beacon cut through the void of space like a desperate scream, its pulsing red light casting eerie shadows across the bridge of the Zephyrian research vessel Cosmic Dawn. Captain Vexhar's 4 eyes tracked the readings on his console, his elongated fingers dancing across the bioluminescent controls with practiced precision. The distress signal was unlike anything in their databases. Chaotic, primitive, yet somehow hauntingly beautiful in its raw emotional intensity. Captain, the signal originates from the 3rd planet of the Sol system, reported Communications Officer Lithara, her crystalline voice tinkling like wind chimes. The inhabitants call themselves humans. Vexhar's mandibles clicked in curiosity. The Sol system lay deep within what the Galactic Council had designated as Sector 7 Gamma, a region notorious for its deadly radiation storms and gravitational anomalies. No civilized species had ever attempted to colonize that cosmic wasteland, let alone evolved there naturally. Humans. Science Officer Quantel's 6 arms worked furiously at his station, pulling up whatever scarce data existed about the system. Captain, according to our records, Sol 3 is classified as a Class 20 death world. Extreme weather patterns, violent tectonic activity, a radiation-bombarded atmosphere, and gravity nearly twice the galactic standard. Nothing should be able to survive there, much less develop spaceflight capability. The distress signal intensified, and Vexhar could hear something that made his blood run cold, the sound of desperation mixed with defiance. These humans weren't just calling for help. They were declaring war against whatever threatened them. "Play the message," Vexhar commanded. The bridge filled with an alien voice, rough and guttural compared to the melodious tones of civilized species. The universal translator struggled with the primitive language before finally rendering it comprehensible. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. Our world is under attack by an unknown alien force. They've already destroyed our outer colonies and are advancing on Earth. We don't know who might receive this transmission, but if there's anyone out there who values life and freedom, we're transmitting our coordinates. We won't go quietly into the night. Sol System Coordinate 7G Alpha Prime. We're making our stand here." Silence fell across the bridge like a heavy blanket. The crew exchanged uncertain glances, their various alien features reflecting a mixture of confusion and growing dread. "Captain," whispered Navigator Hickson, his voice barely audible through his breathing apparatus. "The energy signatures we're detecting from that system, they suggest weapons capable of cracking moons. What could have driven a species to develop such destructive capabilities?" Vexhar studied the tactical display, watching the angry red dots that represented the human fleet. They moved with a purpose and coordination that spoke of countless battles fought and won. These weren't the panicked movements of a dying civilization. These were the calculated maneuvers of apex predators. "Sir, we're receiving additional transmissions," Lithara announced. Her usual musical voice strained with tension. "Multiple human vessels are broadcasting what they call war songs. The psychological profiles are unsettling." The secondary speakers crackled to life, filling the bridge with sounds that had never been heard in civilized space. The thunderous beating of drums, voices raised in harmony that spoke of brotherhood forged in battle, and lyrics that celebrated death before dishonor. It was primitive, savage, and absolutely terrifying in its raw power. Quantel's arms trembled as he analyzed the incoming data. "Captain, the humans are outnumbered 50 to 1. Their technology is centuries behind their attackers. By all logical calculations, they should have surrendered hours ago. But look at these readings. They're not retreating. They're advancing into combat formations." The tactical display showed the human fleet arranging itself into a complex battle pattern that seemed to defy conventional military doctrine. Instead of creating defensive positions or attempting to flee, they were forming what appeared to be offensive strike formations aimed directly at the superior enemy force. Who would attack a death world species? Hickson wondered aloud, his voice filled with dawning horror. What kind of enemy would be foolish enough to threaten creatures that evolved in such conditions? Vexhar's blood turned to ice as he realized the implications. Any species that could survive on a world like Sol 3 would have to be incredibly resilient, adaptable, and ruthless. They would know death intimately, would have been shaped by countless natural disasters and predators that would have eliminated weaker species eons ago. "Captain, we're detecting massive energy spikes from the human vessels," Quantel reported, his voice rising in pitch. "They're powering up weapons that shouldn't be possible for a civilization of their technological level. The energy output is off the charts. The distress signal suddenly changed, becoming something far more ominous. Admiral Chen's voice returned, but now it carried a tone that made every being on the bridge instinctively step back from their consoles. To any alien forces monitoring this transmission, be advised that Earth's children do not die easily. We've survived ice ages, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, and plagues that would have wiped out lesser species. We've conquered our own world through strength and determination. If you're thinking of answering our call for help, know this. We're not asking you to save us. We're asking you to witness what happens when you threaten humanity's home. Vexhar's 4 eyes widened as he processed the implications. This wasn't a distress call at all, it was a warning. These humans weren't crying for salvation. They were announcing their intention to unleash something terrible upon their enemies. The tactical display suddenly erupted with new contacts. Hundreds of human vessels were decloaking throughout the system, each one broadcasting the same message of defiant fury. They had been lying in wait, using their enemies' confidence against them in a trap of staggering proportions. "Captain," Lithera whispered, her crystalline voice cracking with fear. "What have we stumbled upon?" Vexhar stared at the display, watching as the primitive weapons of a Deathworld species prepared to teach the galaxy a lesson about the price of threatening Earth's children. For the first time in his career, he wondered if some distress calls were better left unanswered. The humans weren't calling for help. They were announcing their arrival on the galactic stage, and the universe would never be the same. The first explosion lit up the darkness of space like a newborn star, and Captain Vexhar watched in horrified fascination as the human fleet engaged their attackers with a ferocity that defied all known military doctrine. The enemy force, later identified as the Hegemony, a conquering empire that had subjugated over 1,000 worlds, had expected to find a primitive civilization cowering behind outdated defenses. Instead, they found themselves facing something their databases had no classification for, a species that had weaponized their own extinction instincts. "Captain, the humans are using nuclear weapons as standard ship-to-ship munitions," Quantel reported, his 6 arms working frantically to process the incoming data. "Not as weapons of last resort, as basic ammunition. Their smallest fighters are armed with fusion warheads that most civilized species reserve for planetary bombardment." The Zephyrian crew watched in stunned silence as human vessels, smaller than most civilized racing yachts, darted between massive hegemony dreadnoughts like angry wasps. Each one carried enough destructive power to level a city, and they were deploying it with casual efficiency that spoke of centuries of warfare. Admiral Chen's voice crackled across the communications array again, but this time she wasn't addressing unknown aliens. She was coordinating an attack that would redefine galactic understanding of space combat. "Scorpion Squadron, deploy kinetic packages on the flagship's port side. Wolfpack, I want you to ram anything bigger than a frigate. Your crews are already uploaded to backup systems. Phoenix Wing, initiate solar protocol. Show these invaders what happens when you bring primitive weapons to a human fight." Vexhar felt his blood turn cold. The humans were treating their own deaths as tactical options. Their soldiers were backed up digitally, allowing them to sacrifice themselves without permanent loss of personnel. It was a level of strategic thinking that bordered on the incomprehensible. "Sir, the human vessel Iron Will just rammed a Hegemony battlecruiser," Hickson reported, his voice barely a whisper. The explosion took out 3 additional enemy ships. The pilot's last transmission was laughter. The tactical display showed the expanding sphere of destruction where the human ship had chosen mutual annihilation over conventional engagement. But instead of weakening the human fleet, the sacrifice seemed to energize them. Their remaining vessels moved with increased aggression, as if each loss had removed another restraint on their already terrifying capabilities. "Captain, we're detecting massive heat signatures from the human homeworld," Lithera announced, her crystalline voice trembling. "They're launching something from the planet's surface, multiple somethings. The energy readings are comparable to small stars." The long-range sensors revealed the truth, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. Humanity wasn't just defending their space with their fleet, they were turning their entire world into a weapon. Massive rail cannons, each one the size of a mountain, were hurling projectiles at near light speed across the solar system. These weren't precision weapons. They were instruments of absolute destruction that could punch through battle armor like tissue paper. "Those aren't defensive installations," Quantel whispered, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. Their siege weapons. The humans have turned their homeworld into a fortress capable of bombarding multiple star systems simultaneously. How long have they been preparing for interstellar war? The answer came in the form of Admiral Chen's next transmission, and her words sent chills through every being on the bridge. All enemy vessels, this is your only warning. You have 10 minutes to withdraw from our system before we demonstrate why Deathworlds don't produce pacifists. Earth's children have been preparing for your arrival since we first looked up at the stars and wondered who else was out there. Today you learn why some questions should never be answered. The hegemony's response was swift and predictable, a massive bombardment directed at the human homeworld. Energy beams that could liquefy continents lanced through space toward the third planet, and for a moment Vexhar thought the battle was over. No world could survive such an assault. He was wrong. Earth's atmospheric defense grid activated with a flash that momentarily blinded their sensors. When the display cleared, the hegemony's bombardment had been completely neutralized by a defensive system that seemed to bend reality itself. The energy beams had been caught, contained, and redirected back at their sources with interest. Impossible, Quantel breathed. They're using controlled singularities as defensive measures. The humans have weaponized black holes. The redirected energy struck the hegemony fleet with devastating effect, turning their own weapons against them in a display of technological mastery that shouldn't have been possible for a species still confined to a single star system. But as the data streams continued to pour in, the truth became clear. Humanity had never been confined to Seoul. They had been hiding there, preparing, building, and waiting. Captain, we're detecting human installations throughout this sector, Hickson reported, his voice filled with growing alarm. Hidden bases, weapons platforms, monitoring stations. They've been watching us, all of us, for decades. The revelation hit the bridge like a physical blow. The primitive species that had supposedly just achieved spaceflight had been operating a surveillance network that spanned multiple star systems. They had been studying galactic civilization while remaining invisible, learning weaknesses, cataloging threats, and preparing for the day when someone would be foolish enough to attack them. Admiral Chen's voice returned, but now it carried a tone of cold satisfaction that made Vexhar's skin crawl. Hegemony forces, you made two critical errors. First, you assumed that a species capable of surviving on a death world would be weak. Second, you assumed we were alone. Allow me to introduce you to Earth's extended family. The space around Sol suddenly filled with new contacts, not human ships, but vessels bearing the signatures of species the galaxy had thought extinct. Races that had vanished from the known universe decades or centuries ago were emerging from hidden bases, their ships bearing the distinctive modifications that marked them as allies of humanity. Captain, Lithera whispered, those are Martian terraformers, Titan mining vessels, and, by the void, those are Europan deep scouts. The humans didn't just survive on their death world, they've been uplifting and allying with every dangerous species in their system. The tactical display painted a picture of strategic genius that spanned centuries. Humanity hadn't been preparing to defend one world. They had been preparing to wage total war on a galactic scale. Every moon, asteroid, and space platform in their system had been converted into a weapons platform, and every dangerous species they had encountered had been recruited into an alliance forged in the fires of mutual survival. The hegemony fleet, which had entered the system with overwhelming numerical superiority, suddenly found itself outnumbered by an alliance of death-world species that had been preparing for this exact moment since they first achieved spaceflight. And the battle had only just begun. The hegemony's retreat began 3 hours after their initial assault. But it wasn't the organized withdrawal of a defeated military force. It was the panicked flight of predators who had suddenly realized they were prey. Captain Vexhar watched the tactical display in grim fascination as human vessels pursued the fleeing enemy with methodical precision, each engagement revealing new horrors in the Deathworld arsenal. Captain, the humans aren't just destroying enemy ships, Quantel reported, his scientific detachment finally cracking under the strain of what he was witnessing. They're capturing them. Their boarding parties are... Captain, you need to see this. The main display shifted to show footage from a captured hegemony vessel, and Vexhar immediately understood why his science officer's voice had become strained. Human soldiers were moving through the enemy ship's corridors with an efficiency that spoke of absolute familiarity with close-quarters combat. But what made the footage truly terrifying wasn't their skill, it was their apparent immunity to conditions that should have killed them instantly. The hegemony crew had flooded their own ship with neurotoxins in a desperate attempt to stop the boarders. The humans simply sealed their helmets and continued advancing. When the enemy raised the internal temperature to levels that would cook most species alive, the humans adjusted their cooling systems and pressed on. When artificial gravity was increased to crushing levels, the humans adapted their movements and kept fighting. "They're not wearing powered armor," Lithara whispered in horrified recognition. "Those are environmental suits. The humans are treating a ship filled with military-grade hazards as a mild inconvenience." Admiral Chen's voice cut through their observations with an announcement that sent ripples of terror through both the Zephyrian crew and the fleeing hegemony forces. "All enemy vessels, be advised that Earth's children are now implementing Standard Pursuit Protocol 7. Any vessel that continues to flee will be tracked to its point of origin. We have a policy regarding civilizations that attack our home. We ensure they never have the opportunity to repeat the mistake." Vexar felt his four hearts skip several beats as the implications became clear. The humans weren't content with defending their territory. They were preparing to carry their war to the enemy's home worlds. A species that had evolved on a death world was about to export that death world experience to civilizations that had never known true hardship. "Captain, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures throughout human space," Hickson reported, his navigation skills allowing him to interpret the tactical implications faster than his crewmates. "They're launching something big. Multiple somethings. The power output suggests stellar engineering." The answer came in the form of objects emerging from deep space around the Sol system, massive constructs that dwarfed anything in known galactic architecture. These weren't ships or space stations. They were mobile star fortresses, each one capable of supporting millions of inhabitants and armed with weapons that could sterilize entire solar systems. "Generation ships," Quantel breathed, his scientific mind finally grasping the scope of human preparation. "Captain, these aren't weapons platforms, they're entire civilizations built for war. The humans have been preparing to take their entire species nomadic if necessary. They've turned Exodus into a military strategy." Admiral Chen's next transmission confirmed their worst fears. "Attention Galactic Council members who may be monitoring this engagement. Humanity formally announces its intention to join the galactic community. However, we will be doing so on our own terms. Any civilization that is supported, supplied, or allied with forces attacking Earth will be visited by our diplomatic corps within the next solar cycle. We suggest you prepare accordingly." The diplomatic corps she referenced was visible on the tactical display, a fleet of human vessels unlike anything they had encountered so far. These ships were sleek, fast, and radiated an energy signature that suggested they were built for stealth and infiltration rather than direct combat. They were already disappearing from sensors, scattering throughout the galaxy to deliver humanity's message to civilizations that had thought themselves safely distant from death world politics. "Captain," Lithara's voice was barely audible now, "we're receiving priority transmissions from across the sector. Every major civilization is reporting the sudden appearance of human vessels in their space. They're not attacking, they're just watching, waiting." Vexar understood the implications immediately. Humanity wasn't just capable of defending their home system. They had the ability to project power across the galaxy instantly. Their surveillance network hadn't been limited to a few nearby systems. They had been watching everyone, mapping every trade route, every military installation, every weakness in galactic civilization. The hegemony's remaining forces made one final desperate gambit, activating a weapon that had conquered 1,000 worlds. A planet killer capable of destabilizing a star and causing it to go supernova. The massive device powered up with energy readings that made the ship's sensors scream warnings, and for a moment Vexar thought he was about to witness the death of an entire solar system. Instead, he watched humanity demonstrate why Deathworld species didn't fear cosmic catastrophes. The human response was immediate and overwhelming. Sol itself began to pulse with artificial rhythms as massive solar engineering projects activated around the star. Humanity hadn't just learned to survive on their dangerous world, they had learned to control it. The incoming planet killer's beam was absorbed by solar collection arrays that fed directly into Earth's defensive grid, turning the enemy's ultimate weapon into a power source. They're not just using their star for energy, Quantel whispered in disbelief. They're controlling its output. The humans have turned their entire solar system into a single integrated weapon system. The redirected energy from the planet killer, amplified by humanity's solar engineering, struck the hegemony's flagship with the force of a supernova contained in a focused beam. The resulting explosion lit up half the sector and left a debris field that would serve as a monument to the folly of attacking a Deathworld species. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. Her final transmission of the battle carried a message that would echo through galactic history. To all species monitoring this engagement, Earth's children extend an invitation to peaceful contact and trade. We have much to offer civilizations that approach us with respect and honest intentions. However, let it be known throughout the galaxy that humanity remembers its friends as clearly as it remembers its enemies. Choose your category wisely. The human fleet began to disperse, some vessels returning to hidden bases while others set course for distant stars. But their message was clear. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy not as supplicants seeking acceptance, but as a new power that would reshape the political landscape through strength and determination. Vexhar stared at the tactical display, now showing only the expanding debris field where the hegemony fleet had met its end. In the space of a few hours, he had witnessed the rise of a new galactic superpower, one that had been hiding in plain sight while preparing for the day when someone would be foolish enough to test their resolve. The distress signal that had started it all was still broadcasting, but now he understood its true purpose. It hadn't been a call for help. It had been humanity's announcement that they were ready to take their place among the stars, and heaven help anyone who stood in their way. 3 weeks after the Sol System battle, as galactic historians would later name it, Captain Vexhar found himself sitting across from Admiral Sarah Chen in what humans called a diplomatic meeting. The setting was deliberately chosen, a space station orbiting Earth that had been constructed entirely from the wreckage of hegemony vessels, its corridors decorated with artwork created from enemy armor plating. The message was subtle but unmistakable. This is what happens to those who threaten our home. Captain Vexhar, Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying the same steel that had coordinated the defense of humanity's homeworld. Your species was the first to respond to our transmission. We appreciate that your initial impulse was to offer assistance, even if circumstances made such assistance unnecessary. The human leader appeared deceptively ordinary, bipedal, lacking the impressive physical features that marked most apex predator species, with only 2 eyes and a modest frame that seemed almost fragile. But Vexhar had learned not to trust appearances when dealing with Deathworlders. Behind those 2 eyes lay an intelligence shaped by countless generations of survival against impossible odds. Admiral, Vexhar replied carefully, my crew and I witnessed something unprecedented. Your species demonstrated capabilities that our databases suggest should be impossible for a civilization confined to a single star system. May I ask how long humanity has actually possessed interstellar capability? Admiral Chen's expression shifted into what humans called a smile. But Vexhar had learned enough about human facial expressions to recognize this particular variant as predatory. Captain, that's an interesting question. The answer depends on how you define interstellar capability. If you mean the ability to travel between stars, we've had that for approximately 200 of your years. If you mean the ability to survive in the void between galaxies, we've been working on that for considerably longer. The implications of her words sent a chill through Vexhar's chitinous shell. Humanity hadn't just achieved interstellar travel. They had been preparing for intergalactic expansion while the rest of civilized space remained ignorant of their existence. But surely, Vexhar pressed, the Galactic Council's surveys would have detected such activities. Our monitoring stations cover every major system in this sector. Do they? Admiral Chen's predatory smile widened. Captain, may I show you something? The chamber's holographic display activated, showing what appeared to be a standard galactic survey report on the Sol system. According to the data, the system contained a primitive species that had barely achieved nuclear technology, possessed no spacefaring capability, and showed no signs of advanced civilization. This is the data your council has been receiving about us for the past 50 years, Admiral Chen explained. Every survey probe, every long-range scan, every intelligence-gathering operation has returned exactly the information we wanted you to have. Did you really think that a species capable of surviving on a death world wouldn't have developed sophisticated camouflage techniques? Vexhar felt his primary heart skip a beat as the display shifted to show the true scope of human space activity. Hidden bases scattered throughout dozens of systems, surveillance networks that monitored every major trade route, and research facilities that had been operating under the noses of galactic civilization for decades. "You've been lying to us," Vexhar whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. "No, Captain," Admiral Chen corrected, her tone becoming almost gentle. "We've been protecting ourselves. Your Galactic Council has a documented history of uplifting primitive species, which inevitably results in the complete erasure of their original culture and the absorption of their worlds into the Council's economic sphere. We decided early on that humanity would chart its own course among the stars." The display changed again, showing incidents throughout galactic history where newly discovered species had been welcomed into the Council with great fanfare, only to find themselves stripped of their independence within a generation. Resources extracted, populations relocated, traditional ways of life replaced with efficient Council alternatives. But the deception goes deeper than simple camouflage, Admiral Chen continued. "Captain, how many species in your database are listed as extinct due to natural catastrophe?" Vexhar consulted his portable terminal, his mandibles clicking nervously as he scrolled through the data. "Approximately 347 species over the past millennium. Why do you ask?" "Because roughly half of those species aren't actually extinct," Admiral Chen revealed. "They're here in human space working with us. When we discovered that the Council's definition of natural catastrophe often included things like refusing to surrender planetary resources or resisting cultural assimilation, we began offering alternatives to species facing extinction." The holographic display populated with images that made Vexhar's worldview crumble. Species he had been taught were dead and gone were shown thriving in hidden colonies throughout human territory. They had retained their cultural identities, their technological uniqueness, and their independence, all under the protection of humanity's growing shadow empire. The Altarian crystal singers, reported extinct due to solar flare activity 50 years ago, Admiral Chen narrated as images of the supposedly dead civilization appeared in the display. "They're actually running our deep space communication networks. The Nexus builders supposedly wiped out by a rogue asteroid. They designed our hidden base architecture. The Void Dancers listed as vanished into a dimensional rift. They're our stealth technology specialists." Vexhar stared at the display in growing horror. "You've been building an empire of the supposedly dead, but why? What could humanity possibly gain from such deception?" Admiral Chen's expression grew serious, and for the first time since their meeting began, Vexhar saw something like genuine emotion in her eyes. "Captain, what do you know about human history? Our wars, our struggles, our failures?" "Very little," Vexhar admitted. "Council records indicate your species has only recently achieved global unity." "That's partially true," Admiral Chen nodded. "We did achieve global unity, but not through the peaceful evolution that most Council species experienced. We achieved it by learning through bitter experience what happens when powerful forces decide that weaker civilizations don't deserve independence. We've seen empires rise and fall on our own world, witnessed the systematic destruction of entire cultures, watched as technological advancement was used to justify conquest and slavery. The display shifted to show scenes from human history, wars, conquests, the rise and fall of civilizations that had thought themselves unbeatable. But it also showed something else, the gradual development of philosophies and technologies designed to protect the weak from the strong. When we reached the stars and began studying galactic civilization, Admiral Chen continued, we recognized the same patterns playing out on a cosmic scale. The Galactic Council may style itself as a peaceful federation, but its history is littered with the corpses of civilizations that valued independence over integration. We decided that someone needed to offer an alternative. Vexhar processed this information, his scientific mind struggling to grasp the implications. You're saying that humanity has spent centuries building a counter-empire specifically designed to oppose the Galactic Council? Not oppose, Admiral Chen corrected. Provide balance. The Council represents one path forward for galactic civilization: centralized authority, unified culture, efficient resource allocation. We represent another path: diversity, independence, the right of species to chart their own course among the stars. For the first time in galactic history, civilizations have a choice. The meeting chamber fell silent as Vexhar contemplated the magnitude of what he had learned. Humanity hadn't just survived contact with galactic civilization. They had turned that contact into an opportunity to fundamentally reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. What happens now? Vexhar asked finally. Admiral Chen's predatory smile returned. Now, Captain, your species gets to make the same choice every civilization will eventually face. Stand with the Council's version of order, or help us build something better. But before you decide, there's one more thing you should know about humanity's approach to diplomacy. The display activated one final time, showing real-time surveillance footage from Council core worlds. Human agents moved through the highest levels of government, their identities perfectly concealed, their influence subtle but unmistakable. They had been there all along, watching, learning, and preparing for this moment. We don't just offer alternatives to Council policy, Admiral Chen explained. We've been shaping Council policy for decades, ensuring that their mistakes would eventually create the conditions for their own downfall. The attack on Earth wasn't an accident, Captain. It was the culmination of years of careful manipulation, designed to give us the justification to reveal ourselves to the galaxy. Vexhar realized with crystalline clarity that he wasn't witnessing the emergence of a new galactic power. He was witnessing the revelation of a power that had been guiding galactic events from the shadows for longer than anyone had imagined. The distress call had been the opening move in a game that humanity had been playing since they first looked up at the stars and wondered what else was out there. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened in the Great Crystal Amphitheater of Nexus Prime, the seat of galactic government for over 2 millennia. Representatives from 800 civilizations gathered in an atmosphere of barely controlled panic as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human ships had been spotted in 17 sectors simultaneously, always appearing just long enough to deliver a simple message before vanishing back into the void. Councillor Zethmara of the Alterian Commonwealth stood at the central podium, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into nervous patterns. As the current council speaker, it fell to her to address the crisis that had emerged from what should have been a simple punitive expedition against a primitive world. Honored representatives, she began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked her species as natural diplomats. We face an unprecedented situation. In the span of 3 weeks, our understanding of galactic civilization has been fundamentally altered by the emergence of what can only be described as a shadow empire. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices as representatives from hundreds of species attempted to voice their concerns simultaneously. The translation matrix struggled to keep pace as fear, anger, and confusion were expressed in forms ranging from chemical releases to gravitational pulses. Order, Zethmara commanded, her voice enhanced by the chamber's acoustic systems. The facts are these. The species known as humanity has revealed capabilities that suggest they have been operating at an advanced technological level for centuries while successfully deceiving our intelligence services. They have demonstrated the ability to project military force across vast distances instantaneously and have somehow established alliance relationships with species we believe to be extinct. Representative Korthax of the hegemony, what remained of it after the Sol incident, stepped forward, his scarred carapace telling the story of his recent encounter with human diplomacy. Speaker Zethmara, the threat these humans represent goes beyond military capability. They have offered asylum to over 40 species that we believe to be properly integrated into Council space. They're actively undermining the foundations of galactic order. Define properly integrated, came a voice from the chamber's upper tiers. The source was unexpected. Representative Theiss of the Quellian Hives, a species known for their absolute loyalty to Council authority. But as the translation matrix processed her words, it became clear that something had changed in the usually compliant delegate's tone. Representative Theiss, Zethmara said carefully, do you have something to add to this discussion? The insectoid delegate's compound eyes reflected the chamber's light in patterns that spoke of deep thought. Speaker, My government has received detailed historical records from human sources regarding the fate of the Quellian Fourth Colony. We were told they were lost to a cosmic storm 3 decades ago. The humans have provided evidence that they were actually evacuated after refusing to surrender their traditional reproductive cycles to Council efficiency standards. They are alive and thriving in human space. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber as other representatives began to exchange meaningful glances. How many other lost colonies were actually refugees from Council policies? Councillor Vexhar of the Zephyrian Republic rose from his designated position, his recent experiences having given him a unique perspective on the human question. Honored Speaker, I have spent the past week in direct negotiations with human leadership. What I learned challenges many of our fundamental assumptions about galactic civilization. Explain, Zethmara commanded, though her harmonic undertone suggested she dreaded what she might hear. The humans possess detailed records of Council activities spanning 4 centuries, Vexhar revealed. They can document every species absorption, every cultural suppression, every economic exploitation that we have justified in the name of galactic unity. They have been studying us as carefully as we study primitive civilizations, and their conclusions are unflattering. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't just been hiding, they had been compiling evidence of what they perceived as Council crimes against galactic civilization. Furthermore, Vexhar continued, his voice growing stronger as he delivered his bombshell, they have extended an invitation for any species wishing to withdraw from Council authority to do so under their protection. The invitation includes full technological exchange, cultural preservation guarantees, and military defense agreements. The chaos that erupted made the earlier outburst seem like polite conversation. Representatives were shouting, some in anger, others in excitement at the prospect of alternatives to Council control. Several delegates were seen consulting urgent messages from their home governments, and Zethmara realized with growing horror that some species were already seriously considering the human offer. This is madness, bellowed Representative Thoknor of the Krillian Empire. We cannot allow a single species to destabilize millennia of peaceful galactic governance. The humans must be brought to heel before their seditious influence spreads further. And how exactly do you propose we accomplish that? Vexhar asked quietly. The question hung in the chamber like a toxic gas. The hegemony, despite their technological superiority and numerical advantage, had been completely destroyed by a species that supposedly hadn't possessed interstellar capability just months before. If the humans had been hiding their true strength for centuries, what other surprises might they have in store? Representative Gexali of the Meridian Cluster stepped forward, her tentacled form writhing with nervous energy. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that the humans might have a point. My own species' integration into Council space required the abandonment of our traditional art forms, which were deemed inefficient for resource allocation. We complied because we had no choice. But the loss has haunted our culture for generations. You would abandon the Council for the promises of a Deathworld species? Thoknor demanded. No, Gexeli replied, her voice carrying new strength. I would consider whether the Council has truly been serving the interests of its member species, or merely using them to serve its own interests. The debate that followed revealed cracks in the Council's foundation that went far deeper than anyone had realized. Species after species began voicing grievances that had been suppressed for generations: forced relocations, mandatory cultural modifications, resource extractions that had stripped worlds bare while providing minimal compensation to their inhabitants. Speaker Zethmara found herself facing the possibility that the Galactic Council's greatest enemy wasn't an external threat, but the accumulated resentment of its own member species. The session was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Council's intelligence services. The message was brief but devastating. Human diplomatic vessels had been detected in the home systems of over 200 Council member species. They weren't making threats or demands, they were simply making contact, offering information, and extending invitations to something they called the Galactic Freedom Alliance. Speaker, came a transmission from the communications center. We're receiving formal withdrawal notices from 17 member species. They're invoking Article 12 of the Galactic Charter, the right to voluntary secession. All cite the human offer of protection as enabling their decision. Zethmara felt the foundation of her worldview crumbling as she realized the true scope of humanity's strategy. They hadn't just been preparing for war. They had been preparing to offer the galaxy something it had never had before, a genuine alternative to Council authority. The humans had studied galactic civilization for centuries, identified its weaknesses, and now they were offering every discontented species exactly what they most desired: the chance to remain themselves while still participating in galactic society. As the emergency session devolved into chaos, with representatives arguing among themselves and urgent messages flooding in from across the galaxy, Zethmara understood that the era of unchallenged Council authority was ending. The Deathworld species hadn't just survived first contact with galactic civilization, they were reshaping it, according to their own vision of what interstellar society should be. And the most terrifying part was that their vision was proving surprisingly popular among species who had never known they had alternatives. The distress signal that had started, it all now seemed like the opening note of a symphony that would transform the galaxy forever. 5 years after what historians would call the Great Revelation, Captain Vexhar stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching ships from across the galaxy dock at what had become the unofficial capital of the Galactic Freedom Alliance. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now serving as the Zephyrian Republic's official liaison to the very organization that had emerged from what they thought was a primitive distress call. The view before him would have been unimaginable just years earlier. Human vessels worked alongside ships from the old Galactic Council, former hegemony survivors, and dozens of species that had been presumed extinct. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Crystal spires from the Alterian Commonwealth supported living metal frameworks designed by Nexus builders, while Void Dancer stealth technology ensured that the massive structure remained hidden from any forces that might still consider the Alliance a threat. Impressive, isn't it? Admiral Sarachen's voice came from behind him, carrying the same steel that had once coordinated Earth's defense, though now it was tempered with something that might have been satisfaction. Vexhar turned to face the human leader, noting how she had changed over the years of galactic diplomacy. The responsibilities of building a new form of interstellar civilization had added lines to her face, but her eyes still held the predatory intelligence that had first terrified him. "Admiral Chen," he said, offering the gesture of respect that the Alliance had adopted, a simple nod that could be performed by species regardless of their physical configuration. "I was just contemplating how far we've all come since that first transmission. The distress call that wasn't actually a distress call?" Admiral Chen smiled, and Vexhar was pleased to note that this version of the human expression seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. "Captain, I think it's time you knew the whole truth about that day." She gestured toward a comfortable seating area that had been designed to accommodate the various physiologies of Alliance members. As they settled in, Vexhar noticed other figures joining them, representatives from species that had been key to the Alliance's formation, all of them wearing expressions that suggested he was about to learn something significant. "The transmission your ship detected," Admiral Chen began, "wasn't actually sent to anyone. It was a localized broadcast designed to draw the attention of whichever Council vessel was monitoring our system. We had been tracking your survey schedule for months, waiting for the right moment to begin our revelation." Vexhar felt his mandibles click in surprise. "You specifically wanted us to witness the battle?" "Not just witness it," confirmed Thais of the Quellian Hives, her compound eyes reflecting patterns of amusement. "Participate in its interpretation. We needed credible witnesses who could return to the Council with first-hand accounts of human capabilities. Your scientific integrity and reputation for accuracy made your ship the perfect choice." The pieces of a puzzle that had been nagging at Vexhar for years suddenly clicked into place. "The hegemony attack itself, you orchestrated that as well." Admiral Chen's expression grew more serious. "The hegemony had been planning aggressive expansion for decades. Our intelligence services confirmed that they had targeted over 50 systems for liberation, including several Council member worlds. We simply provided them with information that made Earth appear to be an easier target than their original choices." Representative Gagzali of the Meridian Cluster leaned forward, her tentacles writhing with what Vexhar had learned to recognize as excitement. By positioning Earth as the apparent victim of unprovoked aggression, humanity gained the moral authority to respond with overwhelming force. The galactic community's sympathy was automatically with the primitive species defending their homeworld. But the psychological impact went deeper than sympathy, added Korthax, the former hegemony representative, who had become one of the Alliance's most effective advocates for reformed military doctrine. By demonstrating that a supposedly primitive species could defeat one of the galaxy's most feared military powers, humanity shattered the fundamental assumption that technological advancement automatically conferred superiority. Vexhar processed this information, his scientific mind appreciating the elegant complexity of the strategy. You didn't just want to reveal your existence, you wanted to reshape how the galaxy thinks about power and civilization. Exactly, Admiral Chen confirmed. For too long, galactic civilization has operated under the assumption that newer is better, bigger is stronger, and unity is preferable to diversity. We wanted to demonstrate that survival skills, adaptability, and the ability to think unconventionally could be more valuable than any technological advantage. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime indicating an incoming priority transmission. The display activated to show Speaker Zethmara of what remained of the Galactic Council, her crystalline form reflecting the stress of trying to hold together an increasingly fractured organization. Admiral Chen, the speaker began, I'm transmitting the final results of the Council vote on Resolution 2847. By a margin of 612 to 188, the Council has voted to formally recognize the Galactic Freedom Alliance as a legitimate, governmental entity and to begin negotiations for a new structure of galactic governance. Admiral Chen nodded respectfully. Speaker Zethmara, humanity and our alliance partners accept this recognition and look forward to constructive negotiations. However, I want to be clear that we're not interested in replacing the Council with our own version of centralized authority. We're interested in building something genuinely new. What do you mean? The speaker asked, though her harmonic undertone suggested she already suspected the answer. We propose a federal structure, Admiral Chen explained, where individual species and alliances maintain their sovereignty while participating in larger cooperative frameworks for mutual benefit. No more forced integration, no more cultural standardization, no more resource extraction disguised as aid. The speaker was quiet for several moments, her crystalline form cycling through light patterns that indicated deep consideration. Such a structure would be unprecedented in galactic history. The complexity alone would be staggering. The complexity is a feature, not a bug, Admiral Chen replied. Diversity of thought, culture, and approach has always been humanity's greatest strength. We believe it can be the galaxy's greatest strength as well. After the transmission ended, the observation deck fell silent as the assembled representatives contemplated the magnitude of what they were attempting. They weren't just reforming galactic government, they were fundamentally reimagining what interstellar civilization could be. Admiral, Vexhar said finally, there's one question that's been troubling me since our first meeting. Given humanity's capabilities and the extent of your preparation, you could have simply conquered the galaxy rather than go through the elaborate process of offering alternatives. Why didn't you? Admiral Chen's smile returned, but this time it carried a warmth that spoke of deep conviction. Captain, because conquest would have made us everything we despised about galactic civilization. Humanity learned long ago that the true measure of strength isn't the ability to impose your will on others, it's the ability to create conditions where others choose to stand with you. She gestured toward the view of Unity Station, where ships from hundreds of species work together in voluntary cooperation. This is what we wanted to build from the beginning. Not an empire ruled by fear, but an alliance founded on respect for the right of every species to determine its own path among the stars. As Vexhar watched the bustling activity of the station, he realized that the distress call that had started it all had indeed been genuine in its way. Humanity had been in distress not from external attack, but from the realization that the galaxy was following a path that would eventually strangle the very diversity that made interstellar civilization worth building. Their distress call had been an invitation to the galaxy to choose a different path, and their war fleet had been assembled not to conquer, but to protect anyone willing to walk that path with them. The Deathworld species had looked up at the stars and wondered what else was out there. When they found civilizations that had forgotten how to wonder, they had dedicated themselves to teaching the galaxy how to dream again. And in the end, that had made all the difference.